Hi, what's up? I'm Channel Pup, the mascot for the level-headed fanboy. Welcome to a very special video. Sonic Frontiers, as we know it, isn't going to be around for much longer. Sega are rolling out a series of 3 updates, 2 of which have already been released, and have already made major changes to this game. Not just in terms of things to do, but also in terms of Sonic's controls. And with Update 3, we're expecting major changes to the final hour or so of this game, as teased by the game's director Mario Kishimoto on Twitter. We can expect changes to the final island, Ouranos, the battle against the Supreme Titan, and the controversial final boss, the End. So, before we bid farewell to the current iteration of Sonic Frontiers' final act, I wanted to take this opportunity to analyze this game's climax as it currently stands. I've spoken about this before in my full review of the release version of the game, but I wanted to take a deeper dive as my overall verdict on this finale has changed. At the time that review came out, I was incredibly frustrated by this ending and this finale. And while it's still certainly a disappointing finale to the game, there's a little more brilliance to this than I once thought, and I do want to talk about that and properly appreciate that. So that is what we'll be doing in this video while talking about what I hope to see from Update 3. There are a lot of ways in which Sonic Frontiers subverts the codes and conventions of your typical Sonic game. Usually, Sonic's adventure closes out in a bombastic, typically mechanical location, some form of Eggman construct, but Sonic Frontiers takes a very different approach to its final island. Dr. Eggman doesn't really get the chance to invade. We've seen the consequences of his attempt on Chaos Island with the fallen Death Egg Sentinel, clearly taken down by the Knight. So it stands to reason that this final island isn't going to be a form of Eggman construct. Instead, what we have is a peaceful environment akin to the grassy cliffs of Kronos Island, the first island in the game. Now, I originally criticized this heavily. I was pretty damn disappointed, as at first glance it felt like 2 things. 1, a cop-out, and 2, a cheap asset flip. And I don't doubt that one of those things is at least somewhat true. It's no secret that Kronos Island was originally going to be a much larger part of Sonic Frontiers and was cut into 3 and distributed differently to improve the game's overall pacing and offer more biodiversity in the game's first half. So yes, the real reason why Ouranos Island so closely resembles Kronos Island is because it was a part of Kronos Island. That's not a revelation. At the same time though, a major theme of Sonic Frontiers is the circle of life and death. How civilizations settle, they live, they die, and new civilizations grow. How the Chaos Emeralds once belonged to the Ancients, and how they've passed on. Yet the Chaos Emeralds are still used to protect this world from unknown dangers. With those themes in mind, having Sonic Frontiers end where it began complements that cyclical theme. Better yet, it's a peaceful place. There's growth here in the grass and the poppies that grow atop what was once clearly a battlefield. I think the big mistake was marketing it as 5 islands. They never should have mentioned the number of islands that were in this game. That way I wouldn't have that sense of disappointment. Because the way they did it, they showed off Kronos, Ares, and Chaos Island, while keeping stum about Rhea Island and Ouranos Island. So I think naturally a lot of us were expecting a new biome, which we just didn't get. All while this theming for Ouranos Island is fitting for this final island. Over the course of the game, we've learned about the Ancients and the destruction that befell them, and that enemy that enacted said destruction is now out there once again. In spite of everything they've endured though, there's still growth and life on this island. The Coco still roam, their temple still stands. After their demise came peace and life. Even if the end wins, which it did in the past effectively, life will always start anew. There's something very beauteous about that. We sacrificed the bombastic, trap-laden ending of the typical Sonic game for something more thematically compelling. That's not to say that Ouranos Island can't be improved though, and that there aren't other ways it can still separate itself from Kronos Island in terms of its theming. For one, if we want to talk about how life can begin anew, it would help to have more life there. Yes, we've got the Coco and the seagulls, but it would be good to see a few more critters roaming around this area. You got water, where are the fish? You could have some little unique critters here, like fireflies or something. We've seen the houses that the ancients live in, and they're all still here, but I'd like to have seen more of where they would operate their trades, their villages. Even if it is just the devastated remains, I'd just have liked to have seen more evidence of that. I think having some kind of cherry blossoms or pollen all over the trees as well would have complemented the theme of renewal as well. You could even have a little idle animation of Sonic sneezing because of the pollen. That'd be charming and relatable. I think a major priority for Sega in Update 3 should be making this final world feel purposeful. In Ouranos Island, the key is, like with the other islands, to collect as many tokens as possible in order to advance the story. But Ouranos Island has the least variety here. Other islands are filled with different minigames such as herding Coco or fighting towers. They also play host to initial encounters against a Titan prior to collecting all of the emeralds. All of this is absent in Ouranos Island, with the most notable events being 2 hacking minigames to open the gates to the final boss and lower the bridge to the other side of the island. There is no initial losing encounter with the Supreme Titan. Now, on one hand, I can kind of understand why we don't have an initial encounter with the Supreme Titan. He's meant to be the most powerful Titan there is, and because he's controlled by the End, there's no reason to believe that the Supreme Titan would ever leave Sonic alone when locked in battle. The other Titans were warriors, interested in protecting their land, while the End is about destruction, so it would likely just continue to harass Sonic. Perhaps this could have been an interesting mechanic, however, to introduce some stealth play to the game. The Supreme Titan roams the island, and you may occasionally have a run-in with it. All you can do is run and hide. You could get the Supreme Titan off of your scent by running into the forests or temples, anywhere where you can find shelter. Add an element of survival horror to the game. You could have the End's booming voice echoing through the sky saying it'll deal with you later. Aside from that encounter though, we just need more stuff to happen on this island. Other islands have played host to flashbacks placing Sonic in the destruction of the ancient civilization. It'd be great if we could have that, but interact with these flashbacks for this final island. Talk to the ancients, have Sonic answer for destroying their defenses, and appeal his innocence, that he was manipulated into doing what he did. I also feel like we need the End's release to have some form of corrupting effect on Sage to justify gathering memory tokens for her. As it stands right now, there's no in-game reason as to why we need to collect memory tokens for Sage. That being said, I'm honestly okay with these being hearts that match Amy's tokens. Initially, I thought it was more evidence of a budget cut and a cheap asset flip, but with that being said, over the course of the game, we've seen Sage develop fondness for Sonic and love for her father, Dr. Eggman. These tokens are meant to represent the defining traits of these characters, and Sage's being hearts signify a great deal of development in this character. Now, of course, at the end of this island, we have our Titan boss fight against the Supreme Titan, piloted by the End. My intent with this video is to analyze in an even-handed way everything about this finale, giving it credit where it's due. But it is difficult to defend the fight against the Supreme Titan. The Supreme Titan is the easiest boss fight in this game, and I have no idea why, when it's stated throughout that he's meant to be the most powerful Titan of all of them, and given that he's piloted by the End, he should put up the best fight of all of them. But he has by far the least HP of any of the Titan fights, hence why it's over so quick, and the least cinematic attacks. He doesn't shoot a massive laser out of his chops like Giganto did, nor does he trap you in his mouth or anything like that. So he's not just an asset flip of Giganto, he's a significantly downgraded version. He should have at least had the same amount of attacks as his predecessor. but he actively has less than the first Titan boss in the game. It's made more confounding by the fact that he rocks up with a massive rifle, which doesn't factor into the fight outside of a very brief QTE. We don't even have the danger or challenge of climbing him to gain the final emerald, as Dr. Eggman just finds it for you. Now, one thing this boss does do is that he does more to keep Sonic away. Giganto would stand in one spot, while Supreme uses his jetpack to fly away from you, so you actively have to chase him down. That's a good thing. As well as that, he's got these little cannons to keep you away from him. While he does less to attack you than the other Titans, he does more to defend himself. That's a start. One mechanic that I'm really not keen on is if you try to attack the Supreme Titan without taking down one of his cannons. He'll attack you, so then you parry it, right? But parrying it causes you to go into a brief cutscene of the lasers firing Sonic away from the boss. You shouldn't punish the player for a successful parry. That's just silly. If the game doesn't want you to attack the boss before taking out his cannon, then he should just immediately push you away rather than punishing the player for parrying that attack. The Supreme Titan boss, partly because of that, is just a mess, and I'm genuinely at a loss as to why it's like this. Why is it so easy? Why is it so contradictory to core mechanics? Why is it missing phases of the earlier Titan fights? How do we fix this? Simple, it's basically a blank canvas. It's basically the most milquetoast Titan boss of the bunch. So let's build on it. For starters, I think the boss should begin with you playing as Eggman in his Eggmobile, playing similarly to Super Sonic. Perhaps if you want some easy nostalgia points, which I know Sega can't resist, Eggman could be piloting big arms from Sonic 3, allowing Eggman to fight back against the Supreme when it attacks, but with the main goal being for Eggman to use the arms to pull the Chaos Emerald off of his head. Then Sonic would join the fight. Eggman gives him the Emerald, and Sonic goes Super. The first most important change I would make would be for the Supreme Titan to have much more HP. I shouldn't be able to defeat the boss in 2 stomp attacks, leveled up or not. I don't think it's very clear what you actually have to do in this fight. He's got cannons shooting at you which you have to take out, yet you only have to take out one of them. I think a good move would be to have one of the cannons glowing in a different color, suggesting that that's the one you need to take out before going to fight the Supreme directly. It's just a bit of basic telegraphing. But if you try to fight him directly before taking out his cannons, he'll do one of 2 things. He'll either catch you in his mouth with you needing to mash a button to escape, or he'll fire a massive laser at you with you needing to mash a button to block that attack and not get fried. That way we at least match the amount of attacks Giganto had. Then in the second phase, when he starts flying through the air, I think he should keep these laser wings seen in the cutscene and use them as a defense mechanism. Perhaps they could shoot out additional lasers at you as well. Have him also turn away and move in specific directions, meaning you really have to chase him down a lot more. I'd say have him carry his rifle and take occasional shots at you which you need to parry. And if you fail to dodge or parry these shots, they'll take out 50 of your rings, giving some consequence to the Supreme's attacks beyond just pushback. I understand Super Sonic is invincible, but this is the final boss. It's meant to be, you know, powerful, right? Also, have the Supreme be just generally more aggressive. Have him hit back at you like Giganto did, but increase his attack patterns by double. It would be really cool if he entered a quick succession of left and right hooks, which you had to continually parry in order to fight back. Otherwise, he pushes you to the other end of the island and you have to chase him down again. One more thing as well. If the Supreme Titan is piloted by the end, why can't he talk? Why can't he taunt the player, just like the actual end final boss fight does? I think these little tweaks would be more than enough to make the Supreme Titan a much more fitting final Titan fight that actually lives up to the build-up over the course of Ouranos Island, rather than concluding the epic Titan fights with a whimper. That of course brings us to the true final boss fight against the end, which I want to analyze next. This is probably the most controversial final boss in the entire Sonic series. It has its defenders, but it's generally considered an unfitting finale and a massive anticlimax for a variety of reasons. Some don't like the fact that the end takes the form of a moon rather than a more elaborate eldritch abomination. Some don't like the fact that the end didn't really feel like much of a presence throughout the game up to this point. And I think the most common sentiment is that, well, ending any Sonic game on a top-down shooter-style fight was just not it. What we have is an evolution of the hacking minigame, which shows up a couple of times in Sonic Frontiers and is a decent little pace breaker. The difference here being that there are plot stakes to the battle, and there are more varied attacks, and the player can move all around the screen as opposed to just left and right. So the reason they went down this route is because they wanted a final boss that even Super Sonic wouldn't stand a chance against, so instead you play as Sage piloting the Supreme Titan. But of course, introducing an entirely new playstyle for the final boss risks overwhelming the player, and it can just leave you unprepared for the battle ahead. It's why typically Sonic final bosses take on a simple playstyle than the main one, consisting of just charging into the enemy. By making this boss fight a slight evolution of the hacking minigame, it does at least mean that the player has had some practice for this boss. But here's the problem. The hacking minigame probably shouldn't be the final boss. This would be like if in Spider-Man PS4 for the final fight against Doc Ock, you sat at a computer solving the science puzzles. We can all agree that would just be completely unbefitting and anticlimactic. The big problem here is that it's antithetical to what Sonic Frontiers is all about mechanically. It's an open-world adventure, but what separates it from games like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is that there's no emphasis on survival. Sonic isn't a fragile little man out in the elements, he's the top of the food chain. You see these massive robots and you're hunting them down with an enthusiastic grin on your face. It's all about that hard-hitting, visceral spectacle, and the boss fights in this game typify that, as this tiny hedgehog fires after images of his massive fists at enemies that are 100 times his size that he'd otherwise stand no chance against. Now, I'm honestly not against the idea of playing as the previous boss in order to tackle the big finale. I loved when they did it in Super Mario Odyssey with Mario and Cappy taking control of Bowser in a bid to escape. I thought that was honestly genius. And it was a simple enough playstyle for the player to be able to jump into for the finale, while still packing enough of a punch to be satisfying, and Super Mario Odyssey wasn't even about hard-hitting violence. I think Sonic Frontiers was aiming for the same effect here, but fell really short. It's not helped by the fact that Super Mario Odyssey, one of its core mechanics is taking control of enemies, while Sonic Frontiers kind of just does that out of left field here. So the question is, what is Sonic actually doing for this battle? He jumps in for the final QTE, but other than that, where is he? He's not controlling the Titan, Sage is. So they've benched the main character for the final fight? And it's not like he's even throwing instructions at you, he's just off and about. Sure, the finale of Sonic Unleashed has Chip the Gaia Golem throwing down with Perfect Dark Gaia, but at least there, Sonic is taking down the shields and we actually get to play as him beyond just the QTE. I've had some people tell me that Super Sonic creates the golden energy attacks, but there's not really any evidence of that beyond just the color of the streaks. Mechanically speaking, while the space shooter mechanics are fine and perfectly accessible, this boss fight just doesn't work as a capstone for this game. With that being said though, I'm still pretty conflicted on it rather than just being completely negative. As a piece of gaming in isolation, I do find the top-down shooter to be enjoyable, but it's other elements that really bring this fight together for me. To tell you the truth, I really like the end. In many ways, the end encapsulates what's so great about Mephiles the Dark. He's a manipulator, pulling strings behind the scenes, misdirecting our hero to doom his world, but making him believe he's saving it. The end takes advantage of Sonic's desperation to save his friends and plays him like a pawn. And the fact that this character serves as our tutorial guide throughout the game means that the player has no choice but to invest some level of trust in this entity. Then we have the reveal of the end's true form. A dark moon, as opposed to the usual eldritch abomination we've come to expect from the non-Eggman finale. Truth be told, I love this decision. The moon is a symbol of closure, a symbol of finality. We see it at the end of every day. It's inevitable. It's always looming over us. And if it wanted to turn bad, that'd be an incredibly frightening concept. This, of course, isn't the first time we've had a moon as a final boss in video gaming, but I also love the omission of any kind of facial features here. It's a force of nature, an abyss. It doesn't laugh and cackle like a typical villain. It doesn't even have one singular voice. It's genderless. It's totally unrecognizable as any form of life. It's neutrality. It doesn't smile. Even when it's shit-talking you during that finale, it doesn't appear to be taking any kind of pleasure in it. It's a celestial force. It exists just to consume and bring finality to worlds, lives, and stars. It's about as dangerous of an enemy as Sonic has ever faced, and the name The End is just so foreboding. There's also just the overall visual design of this fight too, which helps to bring it together. While it isn't perfect, I definitely think The End's projectiles could look a little less on screen, and the big laser attack could definitely use some more visceral elements to it. But okay, you can typically see the earth beneath you during any Sonic space battle, of which there are many. But this time it's a world you're not just trying to save, but you're out to avenge. There are civilizations and constructs that stand today, once wiped out, and you're not gonna let that happen again. The motivations for this fight are just so incredibly compelling that I'm generally willing to overlook the underwhelming mechanics, but that doesn't mean I should, and it doesn't mean that we should just settle for that. Finally, compounding all of this, we have the music track I'm With You by Tomoya Otani, which might be one of the best, most emotionally charged final boss tracks in any Sonic game. Now, we've had some incredible final boss tracks from Sonic before, setting the stage for an epic climax that gets the heart pounding. Live and Learn immediately springs to mind as a standout, but I don't think a final boss track in a Sonic game has ever felt quite this fittingly emotionally charged. There are contenders. The Egg Wisp track from Sonic Colors belongs to a far more epic showdown than it's lumped with. Sonic games generally come with a party atmosphere though, and so it makes sense for the climax of the game to be a celebration of your progress set to your theme music. But Sonic Frontiers is a different beast. It's not a game where Sonic is rescuing critters or running through joyful casinos. It's a game where Sonic is bringing peace to the restless souls of an extinct civilization. He's putting together the pieces of ancient graveyards and finding peace within himself and his friends, even squashing his beef with Dr. Eggman, even if only temporarily. So our final boss track here isn't this big Valor celebration, it's instead an incredibly sad track, beginning with ethereal synth voices before kicking into high gear. The repeated melody instills feelings of loneliness, sorrow, as it echoes over the ethereal synth. Forgive me, I'm not really much of a virtuoso when it comes to music, so I'm going to get a lot of toilet brain terminology out there. Music experts, you may cringe accordingly. Of course, we get the drop where the guitars and the drums kick into high gear, bringing us the intensity that you would expect with a Sonic Final Boss theme. With a bridge verse that does inspire hope. There's a lot of levels on which this track works. Sorrow, isolation and sadness, the ethereal quality, the energetic guitar representing Sonic, the bolt of golden light to illuminate the abyss, the intensity of the drums compounding the spectacle of the battle, before all but the piano accents fade out and we're left with something peaceful, reflective. All's quiet for the final blows to this enemy. Sonic couldn't save the Ancients, but he's brought them peace. I'm With You is an astonishing track that represents all of the emotions and themes wonderfully. Then of course we have the QTE, which really justifies why Supreme needed to, at least in some form, resemble Giganto. In the first encounter Sonic has with a Titan, Giganto picks him up and hurls him across Kronos Island, knocking him out. It's here where he realizes he's not strong enough to take him down. Here we've got a bit of foreshadowing representing the relationship Sonic has built with the Ancients and their tech. As administering Sonic's final blow to the end, Supreme grips Sonic in his hand and throws Sonic just as Giganto did, hurling Sonic into the end for that final blow. Sonic, now a streak of light in the distance, crossing the sky. Sonic, of course, pile drives straight through it, but the end regenerates, causing Sage, a product of the ancient cyberspace, to sacrifice herself along with the Supreme Titan, just as the original Supreme Pilot did, except this time, the end is no more. Wow. Okay, so, thematically, there's a lot of brilliant stuff here. There's definitely potential for a much better finale than what we got. As I say, from a story perspective, while it's incredibly hurried, the ideas on paper here offer up one of the most compelling finales to any Sonic game. It's why I generally have a more positive than not perspective on the end fight and Ouranos Island. The Supreme Titan is the absolute weakest link here. Not only does it close out the Supersonic fights on a whimper, it's the last time we even play as Sonic in this game. And what follows belongs to a completely different genre, and frankly feels just alien here. I'm not intrinsically against Sonic Frontiers having this space shooter as a phase for the final boss, and I certainly wouldn't want to see it scrapped. Getting a chance to play as the Supreme Titan against the end is awesome. It reminds me a lot of when you got to play as the Gaia Golem for a few phases of Sonic Unleashed's finale. But it needs another phase. It needs to end on that hard-hitting, visceral spectacle that Sonic Frontiers is all about, that the previous Titan fights boast in spades. If the Supreme Titan boss is Phase 1, and the Space Shooter is Phase 2, it needs another phase before the QTE. And I have some ideas. Obviously, a large factor of the end fight is that Supersonic doesn't stand a chance against the end, so he needs to work with the Titans. Now, you could either make the justification that Sage and the Supreme weaken the end, or we could introduce a new form here. We've seen cyber corruption change Sonic's appearance, but what if it could be used for positive effect? You'd need an explanation in there. And of course, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy did cure Sonic of his cyber corruption. But what if he's able to summon the strength of his friends from cyberspace and the power of the Ancients to create this new form? Or better yet, have the Emeralds start acting all funny, causing Sonic to turn hyper to take on the end. Now that's how you make gaming journalism headlines. I understand Sega's reluctancy to have kind of like the second tier super form, but like, the fans want it, you know? Sometimes you just gotta listen. I'd be game to see it. And trust me, I care about narrative just as much as the next guy. In terms of the mechanics, it would be cool for Supersonic's Psy-Loop ability to finally get some use. Of course, it is a trail that runs out, so what if, on the end surface, you had the glowy speed rings as seen on Yasuhara, and you have to Psy-Loop through those to successfully weaken the end just before wailing on it. The end could also attack you with its lasers and projectiles, which you have to parry, some of which will chip away massively at your ring count. Now okay, let's say they don't want to do an advanced super form, let's say Supersonic just cannot fight the end, fine. Alternatively, have Supersonic enter the control room of the Supreme Titan alongside Sage. The two work together, bringing out the true power of the Supreme Titan. So you could have the Supreme Titan controlled just like how Supersonic does. He floats through the air, he's got a boost, he's got all those attacks. I mean, Sonic has projectile abilities such as the Spin Slash and Sonic Boom, so you could easily refit those projectile attacks to the Supreme's gun. It's just a matter of taking Supersonic's abilities and applying them to the Supreme Titan. That way we still get a visceral, hard-hitting finale. Then at the end, you followed it up with the same QTE of the Supreme Titan chucking Supersonic into the end. See, that way you keep the entire original appeal of that final boss fight while still having a much more visceral and epic showdown. Now, of course, yeah, there is the ending itself that we do need to talk a little about. After Sonic returns to his friends, I think it could certainly use a bit of work. You notice how that final pre-credits cutscene has absolutely no actual dialogue whatsoever, outside from like a yes and an alright? I'm wondering if maybe that's just like a placeholder. Maybe we're supposed to be getting something a little more dialogue heavy later down the line. I'd like Sonic to at least question if Sage is okay and still out there, before deciding to just bugger off home on the tornado. And maybe don't immediately broadcast Sage's you know what, it's too late, that's done now, isn't it? On a whole, the final chapter of Sonic Frontiers, on a narrative level, suffers from severe pacing issues, as Sage dumps a lot of information on us in the form of expositional dialogue. Yet at the same time, for much of Ouranos Island, it feels like we're just killing time before the big showdown. And then that goes by way too quick. There's not enough build-up to the Supreme fight or the end's true form. The two final boss fights are incredibly underwhelming, being either too easy or just not a fitting end to the game. Also, dare I mention the fact that the end boss fight isn't even playable unless you're on hard mode. What's up with that? And what makes it such a shame is that it's a really compelling concept. It subverts the codes and conventions of the Sonic finale and aims a little higher than usual narratively, but its wings are clipped by it hurrying through the story faster than Sonic can destroy a local business in Apotos. Like Sonic, Sega have a chance to make things right and bring this story the closure it deserves. I hope more than anything else we'll make the most of the final chapter of this story this time, that there'll be more to do on Ouranos Island, that the Supreme Titan will offer a challenging fight, and that we'll get a hard-hitting final showdown against the end, one that deserves its incredible music and setup. We can talk until the cows come home about the state of the gaming industry today, that Sonic Frontiers should have released as a finished game with a strong ending from the get-go. But honestly, I'm elated to see Sega giving this one another go, to create the kind of ending this otherwise great story deserved. If they can knock this out of the park, perhaps Unleashed will have a little competition as far as best Sonic finales go. That said, Unleashed will always have the CGI cutscenes on Sonic Frontiers. God, it's gorgeous, just look at it. I really hope they knock this finale out of the park. Sonic Frontiers is one of my all-time favorite Sonic games, up there with Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Adventure 2. I love that we have a Sonic game that's not about saving a world, but bringing it peace. Having these vast open spaces to run around as one of the most versatile Sonics we've ever had, while not losing the sight of the arcadey thrills that come with a Sonic game. It's a wonderful mix, and the perfect blueprint for the future of this franchise. It just needs a better ending, and that may be within our sights. It'll never be a perfect game. The art direction for the Starfall Islands will probably always be pretty underwhelming. The game's technical performance and pop-in will still be lacking. But where it counts, we'll have a game that's not only consistently enjoyable and compelling to progress, but if we can get it capped off with a worthy ending, I think we may be looking at my #1 favorite Sonic game, and it will no longer be sharing the throne with Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Adventure 2. But time will tell. Maybe we'll come back to this video in a few months celebrating how we lucked out. Or maybe it won't pay off quite so well. My expectations are not the highest, but my hopes certainly are. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with me that there is a bit more to this finale than meets the eye? Do you think much is gonna change come Update 3, or do you reckon it's gonna be little things? Comment below, discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to support more like it, be sure to hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below is the link to my Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name in the credits of my videos. Now guys, I must confess I do think I have caught the lurgy. My throat is in a lot of pain right now, so I'm probably not gonna scream the names of the $10 patrons. So real sorry to let you guys down there, but we've got Glad Goku, Sharif, Kale Bennett, That Jordo, Ken K, Dr. SP, Sergio, Cirrus the Skeptic, and did you know the skin on your elbow is called a weenus? Seriously, thank you guys for your supreme generosity. That's a lot of money to be donating to a guy per month, so it goes really appreciated, I'm telling you now. But not to be sneezed at are also the patrons in the $5 tier, where we have SSS06, Dazzle Fizzle, and Vera Wild, who are also incredibly generous people, and I hugely appreciate it. It helps me keep up with the bills. It means that I have the time to make these videos. So yeah, folks do want to support me, Patreon really is the best way. As for those of you at home just watching though, thank you so much, and have a great day.